If you observe the news emerging from Washington over the past 6 hours, it no longer resembles a trade dispute. It doesn't appear to be a simple escalation. It doesn't even seem like the sort of conflict that occurs between nations sharing the same landmass. It resembles the type of financial assault the U.S. has historically reserved for its greatest adversaries, against governments it sought to overthrow or dictatorships it intended to bankrupt. And as of 3:17 a.m. today, that artillery is now aimed squarely at Canada. The US Treasury sent a mandatory order to every significant American bank. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, every single one. This order commands them to end all correspondent banking ties with Canadian financial organizations within a 72-hour window. For those outside the financial sector, let me clarify what this implies in simple terms. Any global transfer conducted in U.S. dollars, which accounts for the majority, goes through a mechanism known as the Correspondent Banking Network. It serves as the infrastructure for the world's economy. If a business in Canada pays a vendor in Europe, that money is routed through an American bank. If a Canadian pension fund purchases holdings in Asia, the dollars are cleared in New York. When a Canadian tourist uses their credit card while holidaying in Mexico, the payment interacts with the U.S. financial grid. Sever correspondent banking, and you do more than just limit commerce. You effectively disconnect a nation from the modern economic world. You render their money worthless on the global stage. You make it unfeasible for their corporations to function across borders. This represents the economic version of a nuclear strike, and the U.S. has just targeted the nation with whom it shares history's longest demilitarized border. This tactic has only been deployed on 3 prior occasions: against Iran in 2012, North Korea in 2017, and Russia in 2022. 3 outlier nations, 3 global outcasts, 3 regimes that the Western alliance unanimously agreed deserved sanctions. And now Canada. Canada has joined that list. The nation that fought alongside U.S. troops at Juno Beach. The nation that welcomed thousands of grounded American travelers on 9/11. The nation that has remained America's biggest trading ally for longer than the majority of this audience has been alive. That very nation is now being handled like North Korea by the U.S. president. Trump is coming undone. The financial structure is fracturing, and the average American still doesn't grasp the events that just unfolded. In the moments ahead, I will break down exactly how this situation materialized. I will explain the specific maneuvers by Carney that drove Trump to such desperation that he reached for the singular weapon that is strictly forbidden. I will also clarify why the upcoming 72 hours will decide if the international economy endures this shock or completely crumbles. Allow me to transport you to the previous afternoon, because the events that transpired in secrecy are the root cause of our current predicament. Following the declarations regarding the Sovereignty Alliance, after the Bank of England made its reserves available to Canada, and subsequent to the shift in defense purchasing, the White House entered a state of emergency. This was not a public spectacle, but a private turmoil, the type where the chief of staff annuls all outside appointments and the phone lines go silent. Insiders report that Trump remained in the residence rather than the Oval Office for the majority of the afternoon. He was monitoring coverage on 3 separate displays: Fox News, Newsmax, and a real-time stream of currency exchange rates. He observed the dollar's value dropping live. Witnesses claim he became silent, not peaceful, but silent in a way that his staff has come to dread. Around 2 p.m. Eastern, the National Security Advisor tried to open a back-channel line to Ottawa. This was not done through the ambassador or the State Department, but via a private go-between, a former Canadian executive with ties to both administrations. The proposition was straightforward. The president is prepared to talk about a de-escalation plan, provided Canada openly admits that the tariff conflict was a simple misunderstanding. Read that closely. Trump was not proposing to lift the tariffs. He was not offering to release frozen funds. He was demanding that Canada publicly degrade itself by labeling this entire ordeal a confusion. He expected Carney to take a stage and act as if the freezing of national assets, the use of wartime powers against a friend, and the economic choking of a G7 ally was merely a minor error, a slip-up, a confusion between pals. Carney's reply arrived in 11 minutes. In the world of diplomacy, that isn't a turnaround time, it is a direct insult. The message consisted of a single sentence. Canada does not negotiate under coercion. We will see the president at the proper international venue. That sentence terminated the diplomacy. That sentence is why the Treasury order was released 12 hours later. Because when Trump read that reply, according to 3 independent accounts from within the White House, he uttered 5 words that altered reality, cut them off from everything. This was not a policy debate, nor a strategic assessment, nor a discussion with Treasury experts or trade attorneys or economic counselors, just 5 words from a furious man at 2:30 p.m., and 12 hours later, the full force of America's financial warfare apparatus was directed at a democracy of 40 million citizens, all because one man's pride could not withstand a one-sentence refusal. The Treasury order was written between 6 p.m. and midnight. We are aware of this due to the leak, and allow me to address the leak, as it is a historic occurrence in its own right. Around 1 a.m. Eastern, a high-ranking Treasury official, not a junior aide or intern, but a top-level executive, contacted Reuters directly, supplying the complete text of the order alongside a personal note. The note stated, "I have worked in the Treasury under 4 different presidents. I have never witnessed a directive this irresponsible. This will inflict permanent harm on the U.S. financial system's reputation. I am sharing this document because the American public has a right to know what is being enacted in their name." That represents a senior government leader destroying their career to alert the population. That is an individual who reviewed this order and concluded that their vow to the nation superseded their allegiance to the president. That leak reveals all you need to understand regarding the danger of this situation. When the people inside the building are pulling the fire alarms, the blaze is genuine. Financial markets reacted long before dawn broke. Trading began in Asia, where the Nikkei index in Tokyo plunged 3% immediately. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong dropped 4%. European exchanges were next. The FTSE in London, the DAX in Frankfurt, and the CAC in Paris all started the day with significant losses. It wasn't limited to equities. The bond market shifted violently. Yields on US Treasuries spiked as international investors hastened their sell-offs. Asian central banks, which had been subtly reducing their dollar exposure for months, suddenly found cause to do so openly. However, the banking sector suffered the most severe damage. Shares of major American banks didn't simply slide, they crashed. JP Morgan shares tumbled 7%. Goldman Sachs lost 8%, Citigroup dropped 9%. Bank of America plummeted 11%, an 11% loss in just one pre-market session. The reason is simple. The Correspondent Banking Network is not merely Canada's gateway to the US dollar. It is a massive revenue stream for American institutions. Every single transfer moving through that infrastructure creates fees. Severing ties with Canada hurts them, but it also strips billions in earnings directly from U.S. banks. Morgan Stanley's experts projected that if this directive is fully enforced, the American banking industry will lose roughly $14 billion in yearly income. That is $14 billion erased because the president uttered 5 words at 2:30 in the afternoon. Here is the aspect that should alarm any American with a bank account. The Correspondent Banking Network relies entirely on confidence. Global banks utilize American institutions because they trust the system to remain neutral, professional, and apolitical. The instant that infrastructure is turned into a political tool, every bank worldwide begins seeking options, not out of desire, but because their obligation to protect their clients demands a contingency plan in case the U.S. president targets them next. That hunt for alternatives has already begun. We have received reports from numerous sources that the European Central Bank convened an urgent meeting this morning. The agenda: creating an independent clearing system based on the euro that functions completely outside American legal reach. This concept has been debated in theory for years. As of this morning, it is no longer theoretical. It is now an active initiative with funding and deadlines. Trump didn't just strike at Canada, he gave the entire globe a motivation to construct a financial order that excludes America. Now let us examine Carney's actions. While the financial markets were in turmoil, he was already executing a plan. His moves over the last 6 hours may represent the most critical series of decisions ever made by a Canadian leader. At 4 a.m. Eastern Time, Carney called an urgent meeting of the Canadian Parliament. This was not a cabinet gathering, but a full parliamentary session. MPs were summoned from their sleep in the dead of night. Some showed up wearing casual clothes. The Speaker began by noting that this was only the fourth emergency session in the nation's history, the previous one occurring after 9/11. Carney spoke to the chamber for 12 minutes. He used no notes and no teleprompter, just a leader standing under harsh lights in the middle of the night, informing his nation of the looming threat and his strategy. He unveiled 3 specific actions. The first step, the Canadian Financial Sovereignty Act. This emergency law empowers the Bank of Canada to set up direct currency settlement deals with any willing central bank, completely bypassing the US dollar for two-way trade. This allows Canada to trade with Europe in euros, Japan in yen, and the UK in pounds without a single US dollar being involved. While this cannot happen instantly, it establishes the framework to make the dollar unnecessary for Canadian trade. Once that framework is built, it remains permanently. The second step, the Strategic Asset Repatriation Directive. Carney commanded the immediate recall of all Canadian government financial holdings currently sitting in U.S. institutions. Every bond, every cash deposit, every reserve in American banks is being brought back. This involves roughly $380 billion in assets being withdrawn from the U.S. financial system. This is happening over days, not months. The logistical challenge is immense, requiring synchronized efforts from the Bank of Canada, the Finance Department, and every major Canadian financial entity. But the order has been issued, and the process has started. The third measure is the one that sent shockwaves through Washington's intelligence agencies. Carney revealed that he had a telephone conversation with the head of the People's Bank of China. He offered no details on the content of the call. He didn't have to. The simple reality that a Canadian Prime Minister is engaging with China's central bank during a financial conflict with the U.S. broadcasts a signal so powerful that words are unnecessary. The underlying statement is clear. You are driving us into the arms of your adversaries. Is that your intended outcome? To be absolutely precise, Canada is not shifting its allegiance to China. Carney is not realigning with Beijing. He is too astute for such a move. Instead, he is utilizing the possibility of Chinese involvement as a bargaining chip. He understands that Washington's greatest nightmare is the loss of partners to Chinese spheres of influence. He is aware that every hardliner in the Pentagon, every planner at the State Department, and every CIA analyst has dedicated the last 10 years to avoiding this exact situation. The scenario where Western partners gravitate toward Beijing because Washington alienated them. Carney effectively displayed his phone and stated, "Observe who I am communicating with." He didn't finalize any agreement with China. That wasn't necessary. He simply needed Trump to be aware that the conversation took place. That constitutes leverage. That is a leader grasping that in global politics, perception equates to reality. And currently, the perception is that the U.S. is losing Canada, not merely in economic or military terms, but strategically to China, all due to Donald Trump. The response within the White House was instant and intense. Insiders report the National Security Advisor rushed into the Oval Office at 5 a.m., holding a one-page summary. The opening sentence stated, "Canada has established contact with the PBOC. De-escalation recommended immediately." Trump allegedly tossed the paper across his desk, declaring it a bluff. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't, but financial markets aren't treating it as a bluff. Gold prices reached a record peak this morning. The Swiss franc rallied. Bitcoin spiked 11% in just 2 hours. These are the safe havens investors flock to when they believe the world financial order is disintegrating. At this moment, many intelligent individuals controlling significant capital believe it is indeed falling apart. Now, I will explain the subsequent events because we are nearing the point of no return. I mean that in the literal sense. A countdown has begun. The 72-hour window in the Treasury order runs out in roughly 66 hours. If that time limit elapses without a retraction, American banks will start severing ties with their Canadian counterparts. Once those connections are cut, restoring them requires months, perhaps years. It involves legal structures, compliance protocols, and trust. You cannot restore trust with a simple phone call. When this occurs, it is final. The economic integration between the US and Canada, built over 30 years, will be demolished in 3 days. Congress is aware of this reality. We are witnessing activity on Capitol Hill unseen since the beginning of Watergate. 3 Republican senators openly defied the president this morning. These were not moderates or retiring politicians with zero risk. They were active senators representing states with profound economic connections to Canada. One stated directly, "This order is unconstitutional, unstable, and un-American." I did not arrive in Washington to witness a president dismantle our most vital alliance because of a personal vendetta. That statement will be recorded in history. Remember this, because it indicates a shift that hasn't occurred in modern politics, a fracture in the loyalty barrier that has shielded this president from every prior scandal. That barrier stood firm during impeachment, during indictments, and during election disputes. However, it may not withstand this crisis because this is not an ideological issue. It isn't a culture war. It is strictly about money. When senators begin receiving calls from the CEOs who finance their campaigns stating that their enterprises are being ruined, ideology yields to survival. We are observing a president who has finally discovered the single boundary his own party refuses to let him breach, the boundary where American economic prosperity is at risk. He stepped over it at 3:17 a.m. while the nation slept. So how does this conclude? I have outlined scenarios previously. 2 routes, 3 potential outcomes. However, this time, only one question is relevant. Does the 72-hour limit expire, or is it withdrawn? If it is withdrawn, Trump endures the most embarrassing loss of his political life. It means he retreated. He hesitated. He threatened total financial war and failed to execute. His supporters will perceive weakness. His adversaries will feel vindicated. And every nation globally will understand that Trump's ultimatums have a shelf life. If the deadline passes, we step into unknown lands. The financial systems of the US and Canada start to separate. Supply lines will halt. The credibility of the dollar suffers a blow that central bankers will discuss for generations, and the world will speed up its pursuit of options, alternatives to the dollar and alternatives to the American financial structure, not out of preference, but because one man's pride necessitated it. 66 hours. That is our remaining time. 66 hours to decide if the Western Hemisphere's most critical economic bond lives or dies. I have relatives on both sides of that line. I have friends whose livelihoods rely on that border remaining open, operational, and uneventful. I was raised in an era where the US-Canada relationship was the one certainty you never needed to question. The singular alliance that stood above politics, above pride, and above the trivial complaints of any individual leader. That era is fading. It may already be gone. The tragedy is not that it was ruined by an adversary. It was ruined by a friend who lost sight of the meaning of friendship. What is your perspective? Can we retreat from the edge in 66 hours, or has the time already passed? Is there anyone remaining in Washington possessing the bravery to halt this? And the question that troubles me most, When history is recorded, will it state that this was the week America forfeited the world?